I'm Steve Sloka, and I'm going to give you a quick overview of the Kong operator. So the idea of this operator is it's going to manage a Kong cluster for you. If you're not familiar, a quick 30-second intro to Kong is it's an API gateway, and it sits between your consumers and your APIs. And what it is it's a proxy. And in that proxy, you can turn on different plugins. So you can simply enable logging and authentication and do lots of kind of cool things with this API gateway. So it's out here at GetKong. It's an open source project with an enterprise offering if you need that support. And the enterprise piece gives you a couple more things, which is pretty cool. So what we've done is we've wrapped Kong with this operator so that we can set up and proxy incoming requests into our Kubernetes cluster from the outside world or from other namespaces. So you can find the operator out here at UPMC Enterprises/Kong operator. And what I want to do is go through a quick sample demo of how this might look if you're going to use it. So what I can do is out here I have my, I'm using Minikube here locally on my Mac, but this will work again in any cluster. And what I want to do is go ahead and create the operator, right? So we'll just follow down through. The first thing to note quickly before we get running is here's the spec of what the third-party resource looks like. So to recap what an operator is, it's basically a third-party resource which lets you define custom objects in the Kube API. From there, you can then have a controller, which is watching for changes in those third-party resources. And when they change, the controller takes action and then it applies them to your cluster. This is what we're going to do. So we're going to go ahead and create, first create some sample apps. And what this is just basically a place to go ahead and have something to proxy to in our cluster. So what we'll do is we'll create a namespace called apps, and we'll create a service and a deployment. And what we can do is kubectl get pod namespace apps, and you can see I have that pod is running, and then the service is running. Now, if you want to do a quick look at what a quick peek at what the sample service returns, it's very simple. But go microservice.apps. So again, I'm using Minikube. If you're curious, I have a blog post on how you can access Kube services directly. So check that out at stevesloka.com. So if I curl that service, what I'll get is basically a quick response of the pod IP that handled that, or the service IP, and then it would tell me the request time, so the time that the request was sent, right? So I can query that all day long, and that's all that returns. Great. So let's go back to our README. Again, here's a sample of that. Now let's go create our operator. So this will go ahead and create that controller. And now what I can do is if I say kubectl get Kong clusters, I can see no resources found. And if I get third-party resources, what you'll see in here is I have this new type called Kong clusters. And we have none created yet, and that's what we're going to do next. So what I can do is go ahead and create my operator, get pods, and boom, our operator is running. Cool. Now that the operator is running, we will go ahead and deploy some sample apps, or the sample deployment. Now, the one thing that you need is Kong needs some sort of backing database, and that can be Postgres or Cassandra. I'm going to go ahead and use Postgres. So in the examples directory, we have this sample Postgres deployment. So we'll just kubectl create -f example Postgres. And now if I get pods, I now have a Postgres database. And let's look at our deployment now. So here's our third-party resource, right? And here's how you can define how Kong is going to get configured once we deploy it. So we're going to give it a quick name of Kong cluster. We're going to say have one replica running, and we're going to set this use sample Postgres true. And what happens is Kong will consume a secret in the in your namespace, and by setting this true, we're going to set the defaults for the credentials that we've set here in Postgres. Right, so this is going to create this username and password, and those will match up. Other things you can do is you can define, hey, here's the public URL or the hosts. So when I receive a request over this host, it's going to forward that upstream to this service internal to the cluster. And this is that Go quick microservice that we wrote in that apps namespace. So any request over this host is going to get proxied to here. And then here we're going to have some plugins. So actually what I want to do is probably turn off the plugins for now, right? So we'll come back to that. So we'll say no plugins. And this is going to create a consumer. So this is someone who's going to consume from the app. And right now we can leave that, but that won't matter either. So let's go ahead and create our cluster. So kubectl create -f example Kong cluster. And now what we have is this Kong running, right? So if we look at the logs on the operator, what we can see is that it's when it spun up, it used this base image, and then it didn't find all of these services, so it created the Kong services, and then it had this. It found this Kong cluster got created, so it didn't find it existing in Kong, so it went ahead and created it, and it created the user. So now what we can do is I can say, if you look at our services, Kong is managed through an admin API, and that's this service. So if I go ahead and query HTTPS verify no HTTPS, and we do Kong admin.default on port 8444, what you'll see is Kong is listening there, and this is the Kong response. Now if you look now, we can see what are the APIs that we have in here. And now we have this one API. So here's the service, and here's the upstream. If we look at plugins, we should have none because we deleted it. And we have none. And we should have one consumer. Again, we're not going to use that right now, but just to prove that worked, we do. Here's that one consumer. So at this point, what we should be able to do is query Kong through the Kong proxy service. So all requests will come through this Kong proxy service from your consumers. And by default, I'm provisioning a load balancer. In Minikube here, I don't have a load balancer, so it's basically going to stay pending. That'll be okay. It'll still work the way we want it to. So what we want to do is basically do a curl on, and we'll pass it a header of host, and the host is going to be service go.k8s.com, and we're going to pass that to the Kong proxy in the default namespace. And what should happen now is that Go microservice should respond. And we see that, right? So the request hit the Kong proxy, and because we've configured an upstream based on this host, it's going to forward that to that upstream service, and then it's responding, right? So now we've basically created an unauthenticated entry point into our kube cluster, and this is going to mirror much like how ingress routing works. But the cool part is now we can turn on plugins. So we can turn on things like rate limiting. We can turn on things like authentication. And what I want to do really quickly is do authentication. So we'll go ahead and put this plugin back. And this is going to enable a JOT authentication mechanism. So we're going to use JOT tokens on that same Go microservice. And we're going to give this user, Sloka, as we created down here, access to this service. So I'll go ahead and save that. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to do a put request, right? So we're going to say, let's go update that third-party resource. And then what will happen is the controller will take action and go ahead and enable that token. So now if we do a logs again, what you'll see is it said, hey, plugin not found. I'm going to go create it and enable that plugin. Right? So now if I do plugins against the Kong cluster, you'll see I have this one enabled. Great. So now if I do that same query against the Kong proxy again, I'll get a 401 unauthorized because we just enabled authentication for this backend API. So again, with 0 code changes, we've turned on authentication, which is really cool. So now what we need to do is go ahead and create some credentials. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and we'll tell Kong to generate me credentials. And we can do that with this little post. Oh, there's a bug there. All right, so we went out to Kong and we said, hey, for this consumer, Slokas, with the JOT plugin, generate me credentials. And this is what it did. Now what I want to do is go ahead and generate a token against this. So these are the credentials, but we need to generate a token. I have a little sample app here, which we'll be able to open up. Cool. And what we can do is go ahead and update this issuer and secret. And this is just a little dummy app to let us update this quickly. And what we'll do is we'll go ahead and grab the secret from that output, and we'll pop that in here. And we'll grab the key. which is the issuer. Now in this sample app, I'm adding some different claims. So I'm saying, hey, I'm an admin, and here's my name, and here's when it expires, and sort of thing. So this is all just very, very dummy, very just proof of concept. So now we'll go ahead and run this, and this will generate me a JOT token. So we'll go ahead and grab that token, and we'll hop out here, and let's go to jot.io. And what we can do is pop that in here and verify that that token was good, right? So here you can see those claims we added to the token. So now what we can do is go ahead and come back to here and do that same request for to that proxy, but this time what we'll do is we'll add a header and we'll add authorization. And we'll do a bearer, and we'll paste that token in, and we'll close that, and I think I always end up with a new line here. Let's take that new line out. Now when I send the request, we're going to pass it the JOT token, and it should validate. And it does. So you can see now that I've actually enabled authentication, created a JOT token, and then Kong is doing the work of introspecting that token and validating is it a good token. And if I go here just to prove there's no smoke and mirrors, if I break that token, you can see it's in the valid signature, so it's forbidden. So Kong is actually validating that that's a valid signed token that was generated. Cool. So this has some work to go, some places to happen. But thanks for taking a look at it and looking at it with me. Again, you can find the operator out here at UPMC Enterprise's Kong operator. Let me know your thoughts, open some issues, open some things on Slack, email me, whatever the best way to do it is. Thanks again, appreciate it.